Hey, y'all. Just a heads up before we get started today. This episode includes some pretty graphic descriptions of animal abuse. Please keep that in mind when choosing when and where to listen. Coos County Sheriff Gabe Fabrizio had a very unusual day at work this past May.
It was immediately apparent that there was just a massive amount of people there, more than we typically see from the Coos County Sheriff's Office or in Coos County in general. And it was, frankly, organized chaos.
The people he's talking about were all from different law enforcement agencies, and the location was a roadside zoo just off of Highway 101 on the southern Oregon coast, known as the West Coast Game Park Safari. On the morning of May 15th, 2025, Fabrizio and his deputies joined officers from multiple local, state, and federal agencies to raid the park and seize all the animals. The Oregon State Police, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Internal Revenue Service, among others, were all there to carry out multiple search warrants at the park.
Like I said, I've never seen that many cops or that many agencies in one place. It was well coordinated amongst all the agencies. It's just once we were there, we had our own individual tasks to accomplish. So the animals took precedent because the welfare of the animals is why OSP and why we were there.
OSP stands for Oregon State Police. A law passed in 2012 gives the Oregon Humane Society the authority to employ officers commissioned by the Oregon State Police to conduct animal welfare investigations. Laura Klink is the public information officer for the Oregon Humane Society, and she was there the day of the raid.
So we had our chief of law enforcement on site. We had a forensic veterinarian on site, and then we had two other folks from our humane law enforcement team that were working side by side with all these other agencies.
A forensic veterinarian is really key to a case like this. They examine animals to look for and document signs of neglect and abuse.
Animals can't tell us what happened to them, and so we're really relying on that veterinarian, and especially a forensically trained veterinarian, to put those pieces together.
The Oregon Humane Society and Oregon State Police had been investigating the West Coast Game Park Safari for at least a year. They knew that they would be seizing more than 300 animals in the raid, and they made arrangements to send each of these animals to an appropriate facility where they could get the care they need.
There were a couple of animals that came to Oregon Humane Society who are either in foster care or have been transferred out to sanctuaries. And they were, a ferret, some chicks, and two tortoises.
I'm just imagining what it must have even been like to get two tortoises into a vehicle. While the animals were the top concern, law enforcement also had other reasons to be investigating the park's owner, Brian Tenney, according to Sheriff Fabrizio.
We found over 80 grams of meth, 8 grams of cocaine, 44 guns, and $1.6 million in cash and certificates.
From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. The West Coast Game Park Safari had a wide variety of animals, including lions and other big cats, capybaras, camels, and a chimpanzee. They also had chickens, sheep, llamas, and goats. People had been complaining about dangerous conditions at the park for years, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture cited them for violating the Animal Welfare Act numerous times. Justin Higginbottom is a reporter for Jefferson Public Radio based in Southern Oregon, and he's been covering this ongoing story. Justin, can you start by giving us a little bit of the history of the West Coast Game Park Safari?
Yeah, so it began in 1968 as a deer park where visitors could sort of walk around and feed the animals. A few years later, Bob and Mary Tenney bought the place, and they turned it into one of the largest tourist attractions on the southern Oregon coast. They expanded and added hundreds of animals, including all these exotic species. And in 2009, the Tenneys retired and passed ownership to their son, Brian. And Brian took up the family business operating this roadside zoo.
And what kind of license did they have to keep all these animals and charge people to come and see them?
Zoos like the West Coast Game Park Safari are federally regulated, so the U.S. Department of Agriculture is tasked with making sure the zoo follows the Animal Welfare Act, basically checking in to see if the animals are properly cared for. And the zoo had a permit with the USDA, but in Oregon, there's also a required state wildlife exhibitor's permit, and zoos also must be accredited by either of the two national zoo associations. The West Coast Game Park Safari didn't have those state accreditations.
Okay, but they did have a permit with the USDA. I mean, what does it mean for the USDA to regulate a roadside zoo like this? Because I think that's not the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of the Department of Agriculture. What does that look like?
Yeah, you're right. So they send out inspectors to tour the facility, check on the animals, and they publish their findings. So those reports are public record, which because those findings were public, that raised a lot of red flags about the zoo. In the last 2 years, the facility had amassed over 80 violations of the Animal Welfare Act. And that got the animal rights group People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, concerned. I spoke with Sydney Bentz, an attorney with PETA, about these reports earlier this year.
The most recent inspection report shows 8 direct citations, which are among the most severe of Animal Welfare Act violations. And they include failure to provide adequate vet care for a lion and a black leopard, who were both thin and had noticeable muscle wasting. Their ribs were showing. And most of those direct violations were also repeat violations. Our October complaint that we also sent to the Oregon State Police referenced 19 citations, including failing to have a veterinarian who treats primates and birds, failing to have an enrichment plan for a lone chimpanzee named George, whose companion Daphne died a year ago, and for not having a sufficient number of trained employees, which is a big problem because there's over 300 animals at the zoo.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot. How long have PETA and others been concerned about this park?
PETA had been concerned about the zoo for quite a while. So there were years of troubling USDA inspection reports, like I mentioned. And these reports give some really troubling details. For example, in 2016, staff shot and killed 2 black bears at the zoo. Basically, one of the bears had charged a fence after a car backfired, and to protect visitors, the staff shot that bear, but the bullet ricocheted and hit the other bear. So they ended up killing 2 bears that day. There were missing records for the sale or death of animals, so inspectors found animals had just disappeared. They would show up one year and the animals would be there, and then the next year they wouldn't. An inspector also found a dead tiger in a freezer, although other storage containers for meat to feed the animals were regularly empty.
Wow, those are some harrowing details. So Oregon has really strong laws to protect animals, and we also have resources set up to enforce those laws. Laura Klink is the public information officer for the Oregon Humane Society, who you heard from earlier in the show.
There's like the 2 parts of our humane law enforcement. There's obviously the agents that are commissioned by Oregon State Police, but, this forensic work has really been, just so important to making sure that evidence is, irrefutable, basically, when it goes to court.
Oregon is actually the only state in the country that has law enforcement officers dedicated to animal welfare and an animal crimes forensics center to process evidence related to allegations of animal abuse and neglect.
Our chief of law enforcement likes to say, if you don't have a veterinary report, you don't have a case. It is so important in these cases to have a veterinary report to really put together the pieces of what happened to an animal, because, again, animals can't tell us what happened to them.
She explained that forensic veterinarians use a variety of tools to gather evidence that can be presented in court.
The Animal Crimes Forensic Center, at that center, things like necropsies are done, examinations of live animals, diagnostics, blood work, and things like that. And again, it's all about, putting the pieces together to really understand what an animal may have gone through.
Justin, I understand that there were 3 animals that had to be killed, be euthanized after the raid. What can you tell us about those animals?
Well, authorities told me that those 3 animals were in such poor shape that they likely wouldn't have survived relocation. That includes a baby camel and a chicken, also a kinkajou, which is a very cute small mammal from South America. They're also called honey bears.
Hmm. Why do you think this raid happened when it did? Like, what was the tipping point?
So, according to court documents, authorities, were aware of complaints about Tenny and his zoo for a while. And besides the allegations of animal abuse and the inspection reports, there was a really suspicious robbery at the park in 2023. In that case, some former employees are accused of stealing around $1 million from a vault on the property. They also took dozens of guns, which probably raised some concerns with police, like why did the park have that amount of money and guns on the property? Clearly, investigations had been going on behind the scenes with a lot of coordination among law enforcement, including Coos County Sheriff Gabe Fabrizio.
This investigation's been going a long time. We'd actually received a lot of citizen complaints. It was a topic in the community that I heard about pretty often.
Wow. And I imagine a lot of those complaints were, of course, about concerns for the animals, but it sounds like there might have been a lot of other illegal stuff going on. The sheriff said that he and his team were focused on firearms, cash, and drugs. What can you tell us about that?
So search warrant documents show authorities suspected a lot more going on at the zoo than Animal Welfare Act violations, like you mentioned. A local detective thinks Tenny has buried buckets of cash and documents on the property for unknown reasons. There's suspected drug use and all of those weapons, of course, revealed from the robbery. So police did find some drugs when they first raided the zoo, which allowed them to get another search warrant. And Tenny has this large, unfinished house just outside the perimeter of the zoo. And when police searched that, they found what an officer called dealer amounts of meth, also packaging materials and scales and such. In a concrete vault with a metal door, they found $1.6 million in cash, cashier's checks, and bonds. As the sheriff said, they also found 44 guns on the property, including one modified into a machine gun.
Wow, what a wild, wild story. Coming up after a break, we'll hear from some former employees about their experiences at the West Coast Game Park Safari. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll brighten your Monday morning a little bit with something new and interesting to listen to each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. That's Jen with 2 N's, and I'll keep you posted on everything Team Evergreen is up to. And now, back to the show. So Justin, you talked to some former employees about what they witnessed at the West Coast Game Park Safari. What kind of things did they share with you?
Right. Well, one employee I spoke with was Alexi Farmer. She grew up in the area, she loves animals, and she actually remembers going to the park as a kid.
Like when I was a kid, I was literally sitting right next to a full-grown lynx with my hands on it, you know what I mean? And I was a small child. And I have pictures of that from when I was a kid.
And when did Alexi work at the park?
She said she worked there for about 6 months in 2023, and she said that there were only a handful of people caring for hundreds of animals, and she almost never saw the owner, Brian Tenny, on site.
Pretty much every single day, there was either a baby born that was dead, stillborn, or there was an animal that was dying, or there was animals that didn't have water or food.
Gosh, and why were there so many stillborn baby animals?
According to Alexi, the animals just kept reproducing, and that caused a lot of problems because of inbreeding. It also sounds like there was a lack of space for newborns that did survive.
Most of those goats at this point are related to each other, so a lot of them have issues. I also know that the camels kept breeding, and I think male camels are really aggressive towards other males' baby camels. So they had to usually take the baby camels out of the adult camel enclosure, and they would stuff them in a pen where like the petting zoo area is. They had these like little stalls. They would put the baby camel inside of one of those. And she would spend, this happened twice while I was there, she would spend the whole time just screaming, like seriously the whole time screaming, because she needed her mom. She wanted to be fed, but she couldn't be in the same enclosure because they didn't have proper separation of the males and females.
What else did Alexi tell you about the conditions at the park?
She said it was pretty horrific, both at the zoo and at Brian Tenney's house, which was also on the property.
There was rotting food, there was rotting carcasses, there was things absolutely everywhere that could very easily get animals sick. There was a lioness in the back of the property that isn't even part of the zoo. It's where he built his mansion that he calls his White Castle. She didn't get taken care of at all, pretty much, and she was just constantly screaming.
Okay, and so you heard this from this former employee, Alexi. How much of these details were you able to corroborate through your reporting?
Well, the USDA reports were really important in getting a sense of the state of the park and showing things like employee reports of underfed animals were actually credible. And then other people also told me about this lioness living alone outside the perimeter of the zoo in a cage at Tenney's house, which just seemed kind of wild to me. One of the people I interviewed is Amanda Zamora, who worked in the gift shop at the park starting in 2022.
So I'm a dog trainer, starting to be a groomer. Like, my whole life revolves around animals. I'm a huge animal person, and so I was just so excited for this opportunity.
She told me she used to live nearby and she would hear the lion roaring. At first, she thought it was cool, but that changed.
After I worked there and after I learned that was her crying, I would play music or something while she did it because I couldn't listen to it. It was too sad. I couldn't. It was horrible.
Yeah, that does sound horrible. What did Amanda tell you about her experience working in the gift shop?
Well, she said there were some signs that things were not quite right pretty early on. She told me they had a bucket of grain by the door and they would sell people little cones filled with grain to feed some of the animals like goats and deer.
Well, when cold season started coming and it was moist in there and it started to mold easy and ants, this was my first red flag. Was they didn't want me to clean it out. They didn't want me to clean. They just said, leave it. It didn't matter. And then maggots started coming because it was slow season. So the grain would sit in there for a while. And then it was getting to the point where I was like, F what you say, I'm cleaning this.
That is really weird. I mean, did she keep working there after that?
She did. She said she was conflicted. She wanted to keep caring for the animals, especially after not trusting the owner to do so. But besides poor conditions for the animals, she also said that she was suspicious about how money was handled at the park.
Because I think it was $12,000 in one day from just admissions and in the gift shop. We made up $12,000 in that one day. And he told me to throw away the receipts and to not write it down and to just put it into the money thing. I thought that was very weird. He did not want that large sum of money being documented, basically.
And I'm assuming the he she's talking about is the park's owner, Brian Tenney, right?
That's right.
What did she mean by the money thing?
She said it was a lockbox of some kind.
Okay, got it. So did Amanda tell you why she did eventually stop working at the park?
She did. She said Brian Tenney threatened her. She alleges he even got physical.
And the first time I ever met him, he was screaming at me, hit the thing in front of me, and then swung at me to slap me. Because I told him to watch his mouth when he speaks to me and I can leave right now. And then he tried to slap me. And I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. I mean, did you hear things like this from other people?
Well, yeah, I did. And I can say it was difficult to get people on the record for this story. People are afraid. This is a pretty small community. Everyone knows each other. And people told me that they genuinely felt threatened.
I wanted to stay there so bad for the animals, but I knew this was going to happen. And then I was like, you know what? The animals will get their justice one day. I can't drag myself through this as well. So I left.
Yeah, I understand what she's saying. And I mean, she was right. The surviving animals have all been taken to new homes. What do you know about where those animals are now?
Right. So the animals were rehomed at sanctuaries. We don't know where all of them were placed, but we do know that George, that lonely chimpanzee, ended up at Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest, that's in Washington. And there he's surrounded by other chimpanzees and is no longer alone.
This is such a good news. Like, all these animals are finally in better conditions and better, happier places, like especially hearing about where George is going, and he's going to be put in a whole group of chimpanzees where he can now be social. And I cry about that almost every day. I'm really happy for them.
Wow, it is so good to hear that about George the chimpanzee. If you look up the West Coast Game Park Safari on Google now, it says it's permanently closed. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. So none of the animals are there anymore, and the zoo is closed down.
So is Brian Tenney in jail right now? Do we know what he was charged with?
So no, he's not in jail, and he actually hasn't been charged yet. I spoke recently with a county prosecutor, and they said that they're still investigating. You know, in this case, there's the animal neglect, the drugs, the money. It's just a potentially very big, complicated case, which understandably takes time.
Yeah, that is understandable. So with these things still in limbo, and, you might not even know the answer to this, but aren't people worried that he might flee? Isn't he being considered a flight risk?
I'm not sure. I mean, I would think so. I can say that many in the community are waiting for these charges to land, though.
Having this conversation with you, I gotta say, as someone who cares a lot about animal rights, this story makes me really sad. I keep imagining what these animals' daily lives were like in captivity at this place. I think some people can forget sometimes that animals are sentient beings with their own thoughts and experiences, and think of them more in terms of their usefulness to humans. But confronted with abuse and neglect like this, for me, the question of how these animals felt this every day is impossible to ignore. And it seems clear to me that was also the case for the former employees you spoke with about how deeply affected they were by witnessing all of this. I mean, what about you, Justin? What has come up for you as you've been working on and covering this really distressing story?
Well, these stories get a lot of attention because I think so many people truly love and respect animals. It's something that many times crosses political or even religious divides in the country. And hardly anyone, I hope to believe, wants to see animals treated poorly. And so, when I first read through those USDA inspection reports, I was pretty floored. I don't really know how things were allowed to continue as they did for years at this park. But eventually the zoo was closed because of a lot of work by authorities and different agencies and experts. And that happened because people in the state cared.
Well, it's so good to be talking to you about this after all of that work has been done and after some of these animals were saved and relocated. Thank you so much for your reporting on this and for sharing your coverage with us, Justin.
Thank you.
Justin Higginbottom is a reporter for Jefferson Public Radio. You can read his coverage of the West Coast Game Park Safari at opb.org. His stories come to you from the Northwest News Network, a collaboration between public media organizations in Oregon and Washington. Thank you so much for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Nalene Silva engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada, Sage Van Wing, and our intern, Malia Fass. Justin Higginbottom and Julie Sabatier did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. If you have a question for us, please reach out. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.